The sun over Louisiana in 1855 did not shine the way people claimed it did in the cotton-rich travel brochures of northern businessmen. It didn't glow warm or gentle. It hung heavy, burning, punishing, almost angry, casting long shadows over the plantation fields as if exposing every secret the soil tried to swallow. Belle Noire, the largest plantation in 3 parishes, stretched across thousands of acres of uneven land, its house standing tall and white like a shrine built over buried sins. Inside that house lived a man whose name could quiet a room faster than thunder, Theodore Marrow, cotton baron, political darling, and the kind of father whose smile had no warmth, only calculation. His daughter, Clara Marrow, aged 20, had become the ghost that people whispered about but never saw. A 600-pound heiress hidden from society like a scandal that breathed. Her body had grown too fast, too early, too uncontrollably. At 10, she walked slower than other children. At 14, she avoided mirrors. At 17, she could not climb stairs without gripping the rail until her fingers turned white. By 20, every movement hurt, every breath felt like something pushing back against her chest. Still, she dreamed. She dreamed of love, of walking under the magnolia trees at evening, of hearing someone say her name softly, not with pity or disgust, but with affection. But every suitor, 47 of them, had rejected her, some politely, some cruelly, some with a nervous laugh that stayed in the room even after they'd left. And then came the last one, the one whose laughter traveled through the walls of Belle Noire like a blade. After that, Theodore Marrow changed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He simply looked at Clara with the coldness of a man staring at a broken investment. His disappointment filled the house like smoke, seeping under doors, settling into corners, clinging to the servants' clothes. By morning, Clara's world was no longer her own. He ordered the west wing cleared out, mirrors removed, windows boarded, curtains ripped, furniture reduced to essentials. He commanded the overseer to station 15 field slaves outside her door, around the clock, day and night. No explanations, no reasoning, no mercy. Even the slaves didn't understand their orders. They shifted uncomfortably, eyes lowered, not daring to question the master, not daring to look at Clara's door too long. To them, punishment was never simple. It always had layers of cruelty, and this felt like one of the deeper ones. Clara heard everything. The hammering of boards over windows, the scraping of furniture dragged out, the murmurs of servants instructed to forget she exists. Her father's boots echoing down the hallway, slow, heavy, final. And then the silence. Silence so deep it pressed against her skull. She lay there on her wide bed, breathing hard, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. She tried to call out, but her voice cracked, swallowed by the empty wing. Her father didn't visit, didn't send a doctor, didn't even leave a message. He simply erased her. Hours crawled by. Days blurred into each other. The only sounds came from the hallway, the soft shuffle of the 15 men guarding her like statues. Clara never saw their faces clearly. She only heard them breathe. They never spoke, never questioned, never stepped inside, because stepping inside required breaking an unspoken rule. She was not to be seen anymore. Clara didn't know why her father had placed those men there. Not for harm, they never touched her. Not for safety, no one was coming to save her. Their presence felt like eyes she was meant to feel, not meet, like humiliation wrapped in the illusion of protection. On the 4th night, Clara tried to stand. Her legs trembled violently. Pain shot up through her knees like fire. She gripped the bedpost until her knuckles whitened. Her breathing turned ragged. Sweat rolled down her temples. The floor seemed miles below her feet. She took one step and nearly collapsed. Her body simply refused. She stayed on the floor for nearly an hour, crying, trying to push herself back up. The guards outside could hear her but could not help her. They weren't allowed to. Helping her meant consequences they could not bear. When Clara finally crawled back into bed, her limbs felt like stone. Her chest burned. Her throat felt raw from swallowing too many tears. She realized something terrifying. She might walk less and less until she stopped walking altogether. And her father didn't care. Outside the boarded windows, the Louisiana night thickened. Cypress trees whispered in the swamp winds like restless spirits. The house creaked in strange ways, old wood settling or perhaps secrets shifting. By the seventh day, something in the west wing began to change. Clara heard tapping behind the walls, soft, irregular, like footsteps where no one should be walking. At first she thought it was rats, but rats didn't move slowly. Rats didn't pause as if listening. Rats didn't scrape the walls in long, patient strokes. She pressed her ear to the plaster, breath shaking, and heard it, breathing, slow, deep, human, but not coming from the hallway, from inside the walls. Her heart pounded. She stumbled back, the boards creaking under her weight. The house around her felt unfamiliar, like its skeleton had awakened. Belle Noire had many stories. People said the original owners hid things in the walls: money, documents, bodies. Clara squeezed her eyes shut and forced the thought away. But that night the tapping grew louder. She clutched the bedsheets, trembling, trying to convince herself she was imagining it. Stress could make the mind invent horrors. Pain could distort reality. Loneliness could fill empty spaces with darker shapes. Still, the sound continued for hours until dawn finally seeped through the cracks around the boarded windows. Clara hardly slept. By the 10th day, something worse began. The whispers. Not loud enough to understand, but clear enough to feel. They rose through the floorboards like cold air, slipping between the cracks and brushing against her skin. Sometimes it felt like they were calling her name. Sometimes it felt like someone was standing inches from her bed. Sometimes it felt like breath on her ear. She covered her ears. She pulled blankets over her head. She prayed. Nothing stopped the whispers. The 15 men in the hallway grew restless. They felt it too, not the whispers, but the weight of something shifting inside the house. At night their lanterns flickered without wind. Their shadows stretched across the walls unnaturally long. Footsteps echoed behind them when the hall was empty. And sometimes when they glanced at Clara's door, the door seemed to breathe. They didn't speak of it. They couldn't. But fear lived in their eyes. By the 12th day, Clara's body was weakening further. Her knees couldn't support her at all. Her arms felt like they'd been drained of blood. Her chest struggled for air. Even her voice had grown faint, barely audible beyond her pillow. But the worst change wasn't in her limbs, it was in her mind. Her dreams began shifting into nightmares that felt more real than her waking hours. Nightmares of rooms with no doors. Nightmares of hands pulling her down into the floor. Nightmares of her father standing at the foot of her bed, smiling that empty smile. Night after night she woke gasping, drenched in sweat, clutching her throat as if someone had been strangling her. During one nightmare she heard a child singing. During another she saw a woman with a candle whispering, get up before he seals this room forever." Clara sat up in bed, trembling violently. Her room was silent. The hallway was silent. The whole plantation was silent. She realized something horrifying. She was losing her grip. Isolation wasn't just crushing her body. It was breaking her mind, and her father wanted that. He wanted her to disappear quietly, not die, just vanish, fade, sink into the walls like the others Belle Noire had consumed. The board creaked behind her. Clara froze. She didn't turn, she couldn't, but she felt it. Someone was standing right behind her bed, breathing, slowly. She shut her eyes. The room went cold. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest until dizziness washed over her. She squeezed her fingers together, trying to stay conscious. And then a whisper, "Don't turn around." Her eyes flew open, but she didn't move. Her lips trembled, breath shaky, tears gathering again. The voice behind her wasn't angry, it wasn't cruel, it wasn't even human. It sounded like someone who had been trapped for far too long. Someone who knew the walls better than the living. Someone who wanted her to understand something important. This house was not just imprisoning her. It was preparing her. The morning sun never reached the west wing of Belle Noire. Even before Theodore had boarded the windows, that part of the house lived in a half-shadow, lit only by reflected light that seemed too pale, too cold, too unwilling to illuminate anything fully. Now, with every crack covered, every curtain ripped away, the darkness inside Clara's room had become a living thing, shifting, breathing, expanding with each passing hour. Clara had not slept since she heard the whisper. Her eyes throbbed with exhaustion, her throat dry from rapid breaths, her skin covered with a thin sheen of cold sweat. Her mind kept replaying the moment over and over, the soft voice behind her, the breath against her ear, the bone-deep certainty that something had been standing inches from her bed. She tried to convince herself she had imagined it, that it was only stress, fear, hunger, loneliness. but she knew the difference between her own thoughts and a voice that wasn't hers. And that voice had sounded disturbingly familiar, not in tone but in sadness. By noon the hallway outside her room stirred with new tension. The 15 men guarding her door had shifted positions, anxious, uncomfortable. One of them had seen something the others hadn't. His hands were shaking, his breathing uneven. He kept glancing over his shoulder toward the far end of the corridor where the shadows clung unnaturally to the walls. Clara heard their whispers, faint, nervous, choked. Something had rattled them, and the West Wing, with its old portraits and forgotten storage rooms, seemed to feel their fear. The house moaned, a long, low, groaning sound, like an exhale from something buried deep beneath the floorboards. Clara pressed her hands to her ears. She wanted to scream for help, wanted to call someone, anyone, but she had learned long ago that her voice, soft, strained, weak, never traveled far enough in Belle Noire to reach anyone who cared. So she stayed silent and listened. Hours passed. The guards changed shifts. Lanterns flickered. At sunset, a warm orange glow seeped through the cracks in the boards, tracing thin lines across the wooden floor. For a brief moment, Clara saw dust dance in the light like tiny glowing insects, and the room felt almost peaceful, until the tapping began again. Tap, 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 slow, deliberate, from inside the wall near her bed. Clara's heart hammered. She slid back across the blankets, her heavy breath fogging the air in front of her. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want it to be real. But the tapping grew louder, closer, more certain. She clutched the blanket to her chest. Then the whisper returned. "Don't be afraid." A chill raced down Clara's spine. Her body froze. Her fingers clenched the fabric so tightly her knuckles ached. The voice was clearer now, closer, as if whoever spoke was pressing their lips to a thin layer of wood separating them. Clara didn't speak, couldn't speak. Breath came out in soft, trembling gasps. The whisper continued. "They kept me here too." Clara's throat closed. Inside the wall, inside the house, someone had suffered too. The tapping shifted to scratching, slow, deliberate strokes across the inside boards. The sound traveled across the wall, up toward the corner near the ceiling, then down again toward the floor. Whoever or whatever was inside wasn't trapped in one place. Clara felt tears gather in her eyes. She wasn't alone, not in the way she had thought. Not in the way the world had chosen for her. Something else lived in Belle Noire, something broken, something left behind, something her father never talked about. "Please," Clara whispered finally, voice soft, trembling. "Please tell me who you are." Silence. No tapping, no scratching, no breathing. The quiet pressed into the room like a suffocating hand. Clara waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Her heartbeat slowed, then steadied. Maybe she had frightened it away. Maybe it only spoke when she was silent. Maybe a loud thud hit the wall behind her. Clara screamed. The guards outside her door heard it. Their boots pounded the floor. Hands grabbed the doorknob, but the overseer's voice barked. "No one goes in," Clara sobbed. She wanted to run, wanted to stand, wanted to hide, but her body wouldn't obey. She curled into the corner of the bed as the thud repeated, harder, faster, more desperate. The wood shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Paint chipped off the walls. Someone was trying to push through. Guards outside began shouting. Lanterns shook. Footfalls scrambled. One man whispered a prayer under his breath. And then silence, complete unnatural silence. The kind that made Clara feel like the whole world had been muted. Clara didn't move for a long time. Eventually the house settled again. The shadows retreated, the boards softened, the lantern light outside dimmed. When she finally opened her eyes again, her pillow was damp from tears, but the room was still. No tapping, no thuds, no whispers. Just the empty, heavy quiet of a place that held too many secrets. Clara slowly shifted her weight, trying to sit up straight, but her legs had gone numb, her back ached. Her head throbbed, her vision blurred at the edges. She had barely eaten in days, barely slept, barely moved. Her father had not sent food today, nor yesterday. Her stomach felt hollow, her throat dry, her lips cracked. Every breath came heavier than the last. She pressed her hand to her chest. Her heartbeat felt slower. Weaker, tired, her body was failing her. Her father knew it would. He counted on it. This wasn't punishment, this was erasure. Night settled again over Belle Noire, wrapping the plantation in deep blue shadows. Cicadas cried in the distance. The marsh croaked with frogs. The wind hummed against the old shutters. But inside the West Wing the air was still. Too still. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, caught between waking nightmares and real ones. She dreamed of the portraits that lined the hallway, ancestors with stern faces painted in dark oils. In her dream, their eyes moved, they followed her, their lips curled, their hands extended from the frames as if the walls themselves were opening. She dreamed of the river behind the plantation, muddy, slow, filled with secrets. She saw something sink below the surface, a hand, a body. She dreamed of a woman's voice humming, soft, sad, hollow. When she awoke, her pillow was damp again, her fingers numb, her breath shallow. The tapping returned, gentle this time. Clara didn't scream. Instead, she whispered, "Who are you?" A pause, then the voice soft as a sigh. "I was forgotten too." Clara swallowed hard, her throat tight. Why are you here?" The answer came after several seconds. "He locked me in." Clara's blood went cold. Locked, not boarded, not hidden, locked. Clara's voice cracked. "Who locked you in?" The whisper didn't hesitate. "Your father." The cracks in Clara's heart deepened. Her father had imprisoned someone else in Belle Noire, someone inside the walls, someone who never left. Clara's breath shook. "Why?" The answer broke something inside her. "Because I saw what he did." Clara's hands trembled violently, uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Her mind spun. "What did he do?" she whispered. But no answer came. Instead, the wall went silent again. The tapping faded. The scratching stopped. Clara was alone. Not because the voice left, but because whatever lived inside Belle Noire had said enough. Her father wasn't cruel to her because of her weight or her rejections or his reputation. There was something else, a deeper darkness, a deeper secret, something he had buried and someone who had witnessed it. Clara stared at the boarded windows, her breath trembling. She felt smaller than ever, weaker than ever, more trapped than ever. But for the first time, she wasn't only scared. She was angry. A slow, burning anger that had slept inside her body for years. An anger her father had never expected her to feel. An anger that began waking up just as something else inside the walls had awakened too. Outside her door, the 15 men shifted uneasily. Several looked toward the west hallway's far end, where the shadows were darker, where the boards were older, where light never reached. One man whispered, "This house ain't right." Another replied, "It ain't the house." Their eyes drifted toward Clara's locked door. "It's what's inside." The wind outside the governor's mansion turned harsher in the weeks that followed, scraping against the shutters like long fingernails trying to claw inside. On the plantation grounds, the slaves whispered about the heiress in the locked upper room the way older slaves whispered about ghosts, quietly, fearfully, as if saying too much might call something darker into existence. Some believed she was cursed. Others believed she was simply broken by the weight of her father's hatred. None of them understood the full truth, and none dared to ask. Inside that suffocating room, the heiress felt time dripping like cold water from a leaking roof. Every day blended into the next. The air always smelled faintly of sweat, dust, and dried tears. She kept waiting for something, anything, to change. But the only thing that grew was the ache in her bones, and the heaviness in her chest that no breathing ever relieved. Her father did not visit her. He did not speak of her. He did not allow her name to pass through the house. To him she was an error, an embarrassment, an unfinished secret bricked into the walls of his reputation. And yet the world outside the plantation continued to turn, and the governor's political rivals began to whisper about the mysterious disappearance of his daughter. They asked questions. They probed. They speculated. And that only made him tighten his grip on every part of his estate, including her. The 15 guards outside her door rotated day and night. They sat on wooden stools like statues of exhaustion, their bodies always tensed, their eyes always lowered, knowing punishment waited for even the smallest mistake. They didn't speak to her. They didn't look at her. But they heard everything, the creak of her bed, the choked sobs she tried to hide under her pillow, the trembling panic whenever she felt she couldn't breathe. At night, when the oil lamp flickered shadows across the cracked walls, she would whisper to herself, telling the darkness stories of who she once was. A girl who wore dresses embroidered with tiny pearls. A girl who tried to ride horses but always slipped. A girl who laughed loudly without shame. A girl who believed her father loved her. That girl was gone now. In her place was someone who no longer trusted her reflection, someone whose body had become a cage she was forced to drag around in circles of her own despair. The weight she carried made her joints throb, her ankles swell, her back ache with every shift in position. Standing had become a task she avoided. Sitting hurt. Lying down hurt. Breathing hurt. Everything felt heavier by the day. One night during a storm so violent it shook the entire plantation, she felt something she had not felt in a long time, the door latch moving. Her heart jumped, hammering against her ribs as if trying to flee before the door opened. But when the wooden frame creaked inward, it was not her father, and it was not one of the guards. It was someone else entirely. A woman, a slave. One she had only seen from afar when she still roamed the plantation grounds freely. A tall, graceful woman with eyes that could slice through a lie before it was spoken. She whispered, "Don't scream." The heiress couldn't have screamed even if she tried. Her voice had shriveled under weeks of silence. The woman stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She moved with deliberate calm, as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Her name was Miriam, the oldest nurse on the plantation, known by the slaves as a healer, known by the governor as a threat because she never lowered her gaze. She carried a small bowl and a cloth. "You're sick," Miriam said softly. "Not just sick, starving." The heiress stared in confusion. Food had been delivered daily, enough to keep her alive. Miriam saw her expression and shook her head. "They don't give food to heal you," she said. "They give food to keep you breathing. There's a difference." She dipped the cloth into warm broth and brought it close to the heiress's lips. For a moment the heiress hesitated, not because she feared Miriam, but because she feared kindness. It had been so long since she had felt it that she barely recognized the feeling. When the broth touched her tongue, something inside her cracked open. Tears slid down her cheeks without warning, falling faster than she could wipe them away. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed anyway, letting the warmth seep through her body like a forgotten memory. Miriam watched her carefully. "Your father thinks hiding you will protect him." The heiress trembled. "From what?" Miriam leaned closer and whispered. "From the truth he buried long before you were born." Thunder ripped through the sky, shaking dust from the beams overhead. The heiress's heart pounded. She wanted to ask so many questions. What truth? Why her? What did her father fear? But Miriam tightened her grip on the bowl as footsteps approached the door. "Tomorrow night," Miriam whispered urgently. "I'll tell you more, but remember, whatever you think you know about your father, you know nothing at all." The door rattled. Miriam slipped out as quietly as she had entered, disappearing into the storm as if swallowed by the wind. The heiress lay back, trembling, her breath shallow, her mind whirling with terror and anticipation. For the first time since her confinement began, she wanted tomorrow to come faster, because there was a truth waiting in the dark, and it had lived inside her father's shadow her entire life. The storm passed by morning, but its shadow lingered in the air like a bruise on the sky. The whole plantation felt strangely alert, as if the thunder had shaken something loose, not outside, but inside the walls of the governor's estate. The slaves moved with cautious glances. The guards at the upper room shifted nervously. Even the horses in the stables refused their feed. Only one person understood why. Miriam had been seen. Not clearly, not by someone brave enough to accuse her. But someone had heard movement near the heiress's door, and rumors already slithered across the plantation like snakes looking for warm places to hide. The governor sensed it first. He always sensed fear before anyone spoke it aloud. That morning, he walked through the corridors with a heaviness in his boots, each step sharp enough to slice silence in half. He did not ask about his daughter. He did not look toward her room. He only barked orders at the guards and demanded a tighter rotation. He claimed it was for security. The whole house knew it was for control. Inside her locked room, the heiress pressed her ear against the wooden door. She heard muffled footsteps, the scrape of boots, whispered arguments, the clink of rifles being shifted from shoulder to shoulder. The guards were agitated. Something had changed, and she feared what that meant for Miriam. All day she waited. Her hands shook. Her breathing grew unsteady. Every sound made her flinch. The sun crawled across the floorboards like a slow-moving shadow, stretching long and thin before finally disappearing into dusk. Nightfall smothered the plantation, and with it came silence, a strange, tense silence that made the heiress's chest tighten. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the door, her heart drumming a slow, painful rhythm in her ears. Then she heard it, a soft tap, not on the door, on the window, her breath caught in her throat. She turned. Someone was standing outside, the silhouette barely visible behind the dirty glass. The heiress froze. The guards were outside the door. No one should be able to reach the window. No one should dare. A second tap, then a voice so soft it melted into the night air. "Let me in." Her hands trembled as she crawled to the window. When she wiped away dust and fog, she saw Miriam's face, wet from rain, dirt smeared across her jaw, eyes burning with determination and fear. The heiress fumbled with the latch until it creaked open. Cold night air rushed inside like a warning. Miriam climbed through silently, landing with surprising grace for a woman who had clearly been running. "You shouldn't be here," the heiress whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Miriam replied, "but there are things you need to hear before they bury them forever." She lit a tiny oil lamp, shielding its flame with her palm. The dim light revealed something else. Miriam's hands were shaking. "What happened?" The heiress whispered. "They know I've been coming to you," she said. "Not all of them, but enough of them to make it dangerous. Your father is furious. Someone told him you were heard crying last night. He thinks you're breaking, and that makes him afraid." The heiress swallowed hard. "Afraid of what?" Miriam crouched beside her, her voice dropping into a whisper that seemed too heavy for the room. "Afraid you'll remember." The heiress stared at her, confused. "Remember what? I don't understand." Miriam looked away, her jaw tightening. "Your mother didn't die the way your father told you." A cold wave washed through the heiress, chilling her from the inside out. "He said she died giving birth to me." "That's the lie," Miriam whispered. "The truth is uglier, more violent, more shameful." The heiress's vision blurred. "Tell me." Miriam hesitated, not because she feared telling the truth, but because she feared what the truth would do to the girl in front of her. "Your mother tried to escape," Miriam finally said. "She tried to run from this place, from him. She knew what he was becoming. She knew what he would do to anyone who embarrassed him. And when she became pregnant, she realized what that meant for the child." The heiress felt the room tilt. "What did it mean?" "It meant," Miriam said slowly, painfully, "that your father would own the child the same way he owned everything else. Your mother wanted you to be free." The heiress shook her head, tears forming. "No, no, she wouldn't run." She loved you," Miriam whispered. "Not him." The heiress covered her face with trembling hands. Miriam placed a steady palm on her shoulder. "She didn't die giving birth," Miriam said. "She died because she refused to obey him." A sound escaped the heiress, a fractured, broken gasp that didn't feel like it came from her lungs but from the darkest part of her memory. Something about Miriam's words stirred a buried ache, a forgotten image, a scream she didn't understand. "How do you know any of this?" the heiress choked out. Miriam took a long breath. "Because I was there." Outside, a floorboard creaked. Miriam's eyes snapped toward the door. The heiress froze. The lamp flickered. Another creak, another, the guards. Miriam blew out the lamp instantly, plunging the room into darkness thick enough to choke on. "Hide behind me," Miriam whispered. "No, do it." The heiress crawled behind Miriam's silhouette, her heart pounding so loud she wondered if the guards could hear it through the door. The latch rattled, then a violent kick. The door burst open. Lantern light flooded the room, blinding them. The governor stood in the doorway, and he looked at Miriam the same way a wolf looks at something it wants to tear apart. The governor's presence filled the room like a storm cloud. His boots struck the floor with deliberate force, each step echoing through the west wing like a warning drum. The 15 guards outside froze mid-step, unsure if they should rush in or hold back. Their eyes darted nervously, gauging the danger they could not name. Theodore Merrow's glare alone could undo a man's courage, yet here he was, confronting a room he considered private, a space he had willed to silence and darkness. Miriam stepped forward, blocking the heiress from view, her frame sturdy despite the hours of running and the chill of the storm outside. "You will not harm her," she said, voice steady but carrying a steel edge that even the governor hesitated to challenge. "Not tonight." The heiress curled behind Miriam, barely breathed. She could feel the taut tension vibrating in the air, could feel the history of violence that clung to every inch of her father's presence. Yet for the first time in weeks she felt something else, a spark of defiance. Theodore Merrow smiled, not a warm smile, not one of pride, but a measured, cold calculation. He stepped into the room, the doorway framing him like the opening of a trap. "And what is this?" he asked. "A rebel, a nurse, or a liar?" Eyes flicked to Miriam, sharp and cutting. "You've brought disobedience into my house." Miriam's gaze did not waver. "I brought truth," she said simply. "Your daughter deserves it." A flicker of surprise passed over Theodore's face. Not often did anyone speak to him in such a way. Not often did anyone survive the encounter, but his surprise was fleeting, replaced quickly by control. "Truth," he echoed, voice low, dangerous. "You confuse truth with insolence. There is no truth here, only my order. And my order has been to keep her alive, nothing more." The heiress's pulse raced. Every word cut through her like a knife. She realized with sudden clarity that her father was not merely cruel, he was meticulous in his cruelty. He had planned every step, every day, every isolation, every guard outside her door. And yet here she was, alive. Somehow, someway she had survived, and now the walls she thought were her prison were shaking under the weight of confrontation. Miriam took a breath. Keeping her alive is not mercy, it is control. It is cruelty dressed in the guise of duty, and you know it. Theodore Marrow's eyes darkened. He stepped closer. The shadows seemed to bend toward him, swallowing Miriam in their breadth. "You speak boldly for a woman who answers to no one," he said. "But tell me, nurse, do you understand what it means to disobey me in my house, to interfere with what I deem necessary?" Miriam didn't flinch. Her hands were steady, her stance firm. "I understand more than you think," she said. "I have seen what hiding her has done. I have seen what your rules, your walls, your so-called orders have done to her body, her mind, her spirit. Do you truly believe this is how a father loves a child?" The governor's lips pressed into a thin line. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an intensity that made even the guards hesitate. The heiress dared not move, dared not breathe too loudly. She watched Miriam, her heart swelling with both fear and hope. Miriam's courage had become a light she had not felt in months, and then Theodore's face hardened into the expression she had seen all her life, a face not of a man but of a force of nature that could crush whatever stood in its path. "You are wrong," he said coldly. "I love her as a father should. She exists because of me. Every day she breathes, every moment she survives, it is my doing." Miriam's eyes narrowed. "Survival is not life, and it is not love." The heiress felt a strange heat rise within her chest. She wanted to speak, to tell her father what she felt, but her voice had been weakened by months of silence, of being ignored, of being trapped. Still, the impulse grew too strong. Her lips trembled, but a sound emerged, a soft, quivering whisper. "I am not yours." Theodore's gaze snapped to her. The room seemed to still, the shadows leaning closer, the temperature dropping. "What did you say?" His voice was calm but carried a weight that made the heiress's knees ache with remembered weakness. "I am not yours," she repeated, firmer this time, the words trembling with emotion but carrying the seed of rebellion. "I do not belong to your orders. I do not belong to your shame. I am myself." Miriam's hand tightened briefly on the heiress's shoulder. The governor stepped closer, his presence oppressive, but something shifted in the air, an imperceptible tension that wasn't there before. For the first time, the heiress felt not fear but power, a quiet, simmering defiance that belonged to no one but her. Theodore's eyes were sharp, cutting, but the tiniest hint of doubt flickered across them. He had always relied on control, on obedience, on the predictable collapse of everyone under his authority. And now, for the first time, someone, his own daughter, refused to collapse. For several long moments, the room was silent. Only the soft rustling of Miriam's cloak and the faint crackle of the extinguished lamp filled the space. Finally, Theodore spoke, his voice low, deliberate. "You are brave, foolish, but brave. You have lived in my house, surrounded by my guards, hidden behind walls, and yet you still claim yourself. You still assert something I thought I buried." The heiress swallowed hard, her body trembling. "You buried the truth," she said softly. "Not me." Theodore's lips twitched. Perhaps it was a smile, perhaps a sneer. The line between the two was imperceptible. "We shall see," he said finally, turning his gaze from Miriam to the heiress. "We shall see who survives this house." And with that he left, the door slamming behind him with a finality that made the walls shudder. Miriam exhaled, her shoulders sagging slightly as the tension left her body. The heiress remained frozen, staring at the door, her mind spinning. For the first time in months, she realized something profound. The confinement, the weight, the loneliness, the guards, her father's meticulous cruelty, they had not broken her. Not yet. And if she could find the strength to rise, if she could find the courage to act, Perhaps the story of Belle Noire would finally be rewritten. Miriam leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "You must prepare. The storm is not over. Your father may retreat for now, but he is not done. And there are things in this house older than him, things he has tried to hide, things that will not let you leave unchanged." The heiress felt a shiver run down her spine. Her body ached, her limbs stiff, her chest heavy, but beneath it all a fire began to burn. Not a fire of vengeance, not yet, but a fire of recognition. She existed, she was real, and she would not be erased. Outside, the wind whispered through the marshes. The storm had passed, but its echo remained, a promise that change was coming. And for the first time in months, the heiress felt it was within reach. The following days at Belle Noire carried a weight that no storm, no rain, and no sunlight could wash away. The heiress moved slowly, cautiously, each motion a negotiation between her body and her will. She had spent months in a limbo of stillness, her limbs stiff, her lungs aching with shallow breaths, her mind trapped in a maze of walls and shadows. But the encounter with her father and Miriam had sparked something that could not be contained, a spark that burned quietly, almost invisibly, beneath layers of exhaustion and fear. Miriam returned that night, but this time she did not come alone. Two men moved with her, shadowed figures who carried the air of quiet authority, silent but unmistakably alert. They were not guards from the main floor. They were outsiders, men who had no allegiance to the Marrow name except to their own sense of justice and morality. Their presence reminded the heiress that she was not entirely alone, that not everyone in the house accepted her father's cruelty. "You must be careful," Miriam whispered, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the West Wing. "The Marrow name carries influence, power, and fear. Your father has spies everywhere. Even the guards outside your door are not all loyal. Some of them fear you more than they fear him." The heiress nodded slowly, her mind attempting to process the enormity of her situation. Months of confinement had left her weak, unable to stand without assistance, unable to even lift her own arms for long periods. And yet she felt a strange exhilaration in knowing that she had allies, however few, and that her father was not untouchable. "Where are we going?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the thick darkness. "Out," Miriam said simply. "You must see what he has hidden. If you are to survive, if you are to reclaim what is yours, you must understand the full scope of his power and the cost of his secrets." They moved cautiously down the hall, the lantern casting long shadows that danced along the walls, shadows that seemed to twist and writhe with life. Each step was measured. Each breath was a prayer. The heiress clutched Miriam's arm, her body trembling with a mixture of anticipation and terror. They reached the staircase leading to the servants' quarters. The steps groaned under their weight, old wood protesting the intrusion. At the bottom, the outsiders paused, glancing toward the main hallway, then motioned for the heiress to follow them through a narrow corridor she had never seen. The walls were lined with old portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow every movement, whose painted faces carried expressions of judgment and disdain. For a moment, she felt as if the Marrow blood ran through the house itself, thick and unyielding. Finally, they arrived at a hidden door, so well concealed that even the heiress had never suspected its existence. One of the men produced a set of keys, ancient and tarnished, and unlocked it with a precision that spoke of years of secrecy. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow, descending staircase leading deep into darkness. "You must be strong," Miriam whispered, her voice carrying both urgency and tenderness. "What you are about to see will change everything you thought you knew about your family, about this house, about yourself." The heiress hesitated, her body weak, her mind racing. But she stepped forward, gripping the railing as they descended into the unknown. The air grew colder with every step. The walls seemed to close in, thick with the scent of earth, dust, and something older, something that had been buried and forgotten. The narrow staircase opened into a vast subterranean chamber, hidden beneath the very foundation of the plantation. The lanterns flickered, revealing stacks of crates, shelves of old papers, and objects that seemed both mundane and sinister in their arrangement. And then she saw it. Chains. Not just a few, but rows upon rows of them, rusted with age, yet still ominously intact. Shackles for hands and feet, collars and bars designed to restrict, control, and punish. The heiress's stomach churned. She had heard whispers of the Marrow family's cruelty, of the punishments inflicted upon slaves, of secrets hidden from the public eye. But the scale of it, the sheer weight of it, made her chest tighten with a combination of horror and disbelief. Miriam knelt beside one of the chains, brushing dust away with careful fingers. "This," she said softly, "is only a fraction of what he has kept hidden. Your father has always been meticulous. Every act of cruelty, every secret shame, every punishment. Catalogued, stored, preserved. He believes in control above all else." The heiress's eyes scanned the room, lingering on the shadows that stretched across the chamber, and for the first time she felt a strange kinship with those who had suffered here. She realized that her confinement, her father's meticulous cruelty, had been part of a larger pattern, a pattern of domination and fear that spanned generations. One of the outsiders spoke for the first time. "He believes he is invincible," he said quietly. "But even the strongest chains can rust. Even the tallest walls can crumble. What you are seeing, it is proof that power is never absolute." The heiress swallowed hard, her throat tight. "And what am I supposed to do?" she whispered. "I can barely stand. I can barely move. How can I fight against this?" Miriam placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You don't fight alone. You learn. You observe. You wait for the right moment. Strength is not always measured in muscle or speed. Sometimes it is measured in patience, in understanding, in knowing exactly when to act." The heiress nodded slowly, taking in the room, the chains, the shadows, and the weight of generations of cruelty. She felt a strange determination settle within her. Her body was weak, but her mind, for the first time in months, was alert. Her heart, though heavy, carried a spark of hope, a spark that would not be extinguished by walls, by chains, or by her father's relentless control. For hours they explored the hidden chamber, discovering records of past abuses, journals of overseers, and remnants of lives that had been dominated by fear and oppression. Each discovery strengthened the heiress's resolve. She realized that her father's power was immense, but it was not infinite. And within that realization lay the seed of rebellion, the understanding that she could, in time, reclaim her life, her body, her freedom. As they ascended back to the West Wing, the heiress felt a new sense of purpose. The storm outside had long passed, but within her, a tempest was building, a tempest of understanding, courage, and resolve. That night she lay in her bed, her body exhausted but her mind alight with plans, possibilities, and the knowledge that she was no longer alone. She had seen the depths of her father's cruelty, and in doing so she had glimpsed the potential for her own strength. The plantation remained silent, but for the first time the heiress did not fear it. The walls could no longer contain her mind. The chains, the guards, the secrets, they could delay her, but they could not stop the awakening that had begun within her. And deep inside, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her story was far from over. The heiress woke before dawn, the cold seeping through the boards of her room like it had a mind of its own. The storm from the previous week had passed, leaving behind a marshy fog that rolled across the plantation like a living curtain, obscuring the earth and concealing every shadow. But the heiress did not feel fear this morning. She felt anticipation. She felt power, quiet, deliberate, patient power, the kind that had been brewing inside her ever since Miriam had shown her the hidden chamber, the chains, the truth. She rose carefully, her limbs trembling, her body weak but her mind sharpened by the knowledge she had gained. For months her confinement had been total. She had been chained by circumstance, by fear, by her father's meticulous cruelty. And yet she had learned, she had observed, she had prepared, the heiress was ready. Miriam entered silently, as always, carrying a small satchel. She placed it on the bed. "This contains what you need," she whispered. "Everything else you carry inside yourself." Heiress nodded, eyes narrowing with determination. "I will not fail," she said, her voice steady for the first time in months. "Do not think of failure," Miriam said. "Think of freedom, and remember the mind is stronger than the body." Outside, the guards made their usual rounds. The governor, ever vigilant, had not anticipated that his daughter had been quietly planning, quietly preparing, quietly gathering knowledge and courage while he believed her broken. He still assumed obedience, still assumed fear. and that arrogance would be his undoing. Hours later, as the sun rose over the marshes and stretched golden fingers across the plantation, the heiress moved. Step by careful step, she followed Miriam to the West Wing hallway. Each movement carried risk, but every risk had been calculated. She remembered the change she had seen in the hidden chamber, the stories of those who had suffered, and the determination that had risen within her. Today she would confront her father, not as a child, not as a victim, but as a force that demanded recognition. The door to the governor's study opened without a knock. Theodore Marrow was already there, seated behind a massive oak desk, reading papers with the same sharp, commanding precision he had always displayed. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing. "You move," he said. "I did not command it." "I move," she replied firmly, "because I must." The governor's lips pressed into a thin line. He gestured for a guard to intervene, but none moved. He realized for the first time that control had shifted, if only slightly. His daughter was no longer a passive figure to be manipulated. She was a presence, a challenge. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice low, dangerous. "I mean," she said, lifting her chin, "that I will not be confined any longer. I will not live in fear of you or your whims. The secrets you buried, the cruelty you practiced, they end here, today." For a long moment Theodore did not move. Then he laughed, soft, cruel, but edged with disbelief. "Do you think you can confront me?" he said. "You chained by your own weakness, confined by your own body, you are no threat." "I am no longer the girl you locked away," she said. "I am stronger because of what you did, not weaker, and strength is not measured in flesh alone." The room fell silent. Even the guards who lingered at the edges of the doorway held their breath. The tension was palpable, a living thing that stretched across the study and into every corridor of Belle Noire. The heiress continued, voice rising with quiet authority. "You hid your cruelty behind walls, chains, and silence. You believed that fear was enough to control me, to erase me. You were wrong. I remember everything you tried to take from me, and I refuse to let it define me." Theodore's face darkened. For the first time, the certainty of his absolute power wavered. The heiress, once passive, now radiated the same authority he had wielded for decades. He realized that he could not rely on fear alone, not when confronted by a mind awakened, a spirit unbroken. Suddenly, Miriam stepped forward, placing her hand lightly on the heiress's arm. "You are not alone," she said. "You carry the truth, and truth is stronger than any chains." The heiress nodded. She felt the weight of generations pressing on her, the memories of the oppressed and the silenced, the hidden chamber beneath the house, the stories etched in every chain. She realized her father's cruelty had not created weakness, it had created resolve. With a measured breath, she spoke again. "Today, the story of Belle Noire changes. Not because of fear, not because of cruelty, but because of justice. I claim my life, my freedom, my voice." The governor stood abruptly, rage flashing in his eyes, but the heiress did not flinch. She had learned patience, observation, calculation, and she had allies. The men Miriam had brought, the understanding of the hidden truths, the knowledge of his secrets, all gave her a leverage he could not anticipate. In the tense moments that followed, Theodore Marrow realized the truth. Control is an illusion when the spirit refuses to obey. The heiress did not have to overpower him physically. She did not have to strike or shout. She merely had to stand firm in her resolve, embodying the power that had always been hers but had been buried by his tyranny. For the first time, the governor felt fear, not for his life but for his legacy. The walls he had built, the chains he had relied upon, were meaningless against the will of the one he had sought to break. And the realization was both shocking and terrifying. The heiress exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle around her. She was exhausted, her body aching from months of neglect and confinement, but her mind was clear. Her father's power had limits. The plantation, the house, the history, it was hers to witness, to understand, to change. Miriam's hand squeezed hers gently. "It begins with you," she said softly. And it did. The Governor Marrow, once the embodiment of fear and control, retreated into the shadows of his office, uncertain, uneasy, aware that his daughter had become a force that could not be contained. The heiress did not chase him. She did not strike. She simply stood, quiet, resolute, alive in a way she had never been before. As the sun broke over the horizon, streaming gold across the marshes and spilling into the plantation, the heiress understood something profound. The past, no matter how dark, does not define the future. Chains may bind bodies, walls may imprison spirits, cruelty may seek to erase life, but courage, truth, and willpower endure. She stepped forward, ready to reclaim everything that had been denied to her. The plantation would remember this day, not for her father's cruelty, but for her strength, her resolve, and her refusal to be silenced. And in the quiet aftermath, Miriam whispered, "Remember this, the strongest chains are the ones you cannot see. Break them first and the rest will follow." The heiress nodded, tears of relief and determination mixing on her cheeks. The weight that had burdened her body and soul for so long lifted slightly, not entirely, but enough to remind her that she was alive, and she was free in mind and spirit. Belle Noire would never be the same, and the moral echoed through the halls as clear as the morning light. True freedom is born not from the absence of chains, but from the courage to defy them.